أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله صلى الله عليه وسلم أما بعد. It's me, Mustafa Bey, Sunday Moors Islamic Assembly, and I have an address to the Muslim youth of America. This address is not to take shots at anyone, but simply to convey my observations uh, and to apply my own personal knowledge and wisdom to the scenario and impart what, inshallah, some might receive some benefit from. Much of what we face and much of what we are plagued with in the inner cities, the urban centers of the United States of America, where primarily African American Muslims domicile. There are things that we face socially, uh, which over time end up corrupting and eroding the moral fortitude of our communities. There's no doubt about that. Popular culture is jahi, uh, uh, and so what we tend to do is face or focus on what we perceive as the most imminent threat, and that being foreign ideas entering into the ranks through the various mediums, et cetera, right? Things that can decay or corrupt the youth and lead to conduct unbecoming of Muslims. And so we have pretty much focused on those things, and we had some good programs to address those things, right? But the more pressing matters of economic stability and sustainability are things where we seem to lack an adept understanding of, and therefore fail to uh, uh, create programs to address these things in any real meaningful manner. So for the youth, I would suggest that the people who lead our salats, and like I said, this is not a shot at them uh, for what they don't know, but they're qualified to lead the salat. But the economic issues that we face once you step outside the masajid are very real and very impending. It consists of contracts, uh, oftentimes contracts that trespass upon your rights as a Muslim. And there's no one talking about how to purify those contracts, right? So there is a level of bondage. There's a level of bondage that is occurring in our communities, and it's economic bondage, right? No one has a program to address it. And that's unfortunate. So, in order to understand what's really going on economically in America, you got to have the historical context, right? Because we've been fed a cultural narrative that America is the land of the free, home of the brave, beacon of liberty, et cetera, right? Let's just start with freedom. Their freedom began when they protested and rebelled and stepped away from their colonial masters. What did they have to do when they stepped away from the colonial masters, right? They declared their independence. What does independence mean? It means that you have to do for yourself, that you are not sitting around waiting on somebody else to come do something for you, that you tend to the affairs of men, that you assemble yourself, that you resolve in what it is you're going to do. And that's what they did. And they carved out a space in the world in doing so, right? So, along the process, 1786, Morocco recognizes America. Before their constitution is even complete, they're in a contractual agreement with a Muslim polity that has secured Muslim rights right here in America. How is it that Islamophobia is an issue? I tell you, Muslims drop the ball. Muslims don't pick up on the thread of American Islamic history. They only pick up where they're concerned for some reason. But saying that to say this, we've had instances of Muslims, African Muslims in particular, being freed because of this treaty and because of a petition based on the First Amendment of the Constitution by the Free Sundry Moors of South Carolina. The petition was to be declared Moors and not Negroes. Why is that important? It's important because there is a fraud, conspiracy, and conversion taking place that took place historically in the United States of America, where in which people were taken out of their proper person, converted into something else. That's a process. We call it denationalization, right? So, America as an independent nation, right, did not have gold mines or silver mines at the time. They were agriculturalists, right? The bulk of their money was coming from slavery, right? And so you have a split in philosophies in their government between what's called the Jeffersonian Republicans and the uh, Federalist Party. The Jeffersonian Republicans were more about securing the rights from the British that they fought for, right, in the Revolution, which translates into what's called states' rights. The, the Federalists were concerned about the the American enterprise internationally being able to do commerce in the world. So famously, Alexander Hamilton is quoted as saying, and this is not verbatim, that the United States basically had to take on loans, right, to take on a debt to get to gain credit, because that's the way it worked at that time, right? So they become indebted to foreign nations, principally Morocco, the British, the Netherlands, the French. Uh, okay, and so they were loaned money in gold and silver, right? They never paid that back, which means they defaulted on the loan. International creditors say, well, what do we do about that? Renegotiate terms, get an extension, call a moratorium, 20 years, bam. Okay. 20 years go by, they default again. Okay. Ultimately, the foreign powers who are looking at how do they get the return on their interest, right, are looking at ways of establishing, some type of attachments, encumbrances, liens, on the United States and taxes, right? So they have an interest in uh, of, the abolishment of slavery because uh, America can't be this independent grow to be an independent economic powerhouse that would be not in the interest of the banking cartels of the world, like the Rothschilds, right? And so you have politicking against the South and abolishing the slavery in the South because that's where the bulk of the money was that was independent, was the planters, the agriculturalists who used slave labor to gain a profit in their crops, tobacco, cotton, et cetera, right? So that's divergent interests, right? Ultimately, the banking powers win. The banking powers win in the form of the Civil War, when the war that they tell you was over slavery, but it was also over these economic issues, right? They forced the southern states uh, back into the Union, right? And forced them to accept what's called the 14th Amendment. I want to back up for a minute. First, you have what's called the 13th Amendment, the original 13th Amendment, which was 1812, which was the uh, uh, amendment against what's called titles of nobility, emoluments, and so on and so forth. What are titles of nobility? Titles of nobility is when uh, the American president or anyone else receives decorations and titles from a foreign power. That compromises one, right? Sort of like when Trump went to Israel and they gave him this title of whatever it is, some type of Jewish title they gave him, making he donned the yarmulke and that's officially who he is for them or whatever. That's a foreign title. That's directly in opposition to the original titles of nobility clause of the 13th Amendment, the original 13th Amendment. However, I think they relocated it somewhere else in the Constitution. Can't remember right now. Anyway, so uh, and the emoluments, like receiving gifts and presents from foreign powers, like airplanes from Qatar. I mean, what are we doing here? But the Americans don't know the Constitution anymore. So, okay. So you have the 13th Amendment, then you have this thing called the 14th Amendment that historically was not ratified, that was rushed through Congress, kind of like the Patriot Act was. Didn't have the appropriate votes, yet it had the force of the banking institutions behind it because it had what's called the incorporation clause in it. The incorporation clause in it is what allowed big corporations to grow up in America, to be deemed persons in the eyes of the law, and therefore have the rights of persons, right? What's that? The ability to own property, the ability to sue and be sued, okay? So that's what's going on. Then you have this thing called the 15th Amendment, right? And the 15th Amendment is so that the formerly enslaved could be enfranchised and gain what's called suffrage or the right to vote. Now, if you were freed in the 13th Amendment, you should have been made a citizen and had the right to vote originally right there. But we didn't because there was never an intention for you to be a de jure citizen of the American Republic. That just is what it is, in spite of people's feelings. Okay, Dred Scott case told us that, right? People of African descent were not intended to be citizens of the United States. It is what it is. This is what their body politic. But you got this population that was raised under this alleged democratic ideology that's going to force them to accept them, force them into integration and all these other things, right? Okay, well, that's against the Republican form of government. The Republic was the original